Hi everybody, I'm going to do a quick repair on this Toro lawnmower today. But first I want to talk briefly about this lawnmower. I just want to say that this is probably the best push or self-propelled lawnmower that I've ever owned or ever seen for that matter. It's a 21-inch self-propelled mower. It's a 5 horsepower engine on it, overhead valve construction. I don't know who makes the motor for these. But this era, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was a Honda motor, because it's been pretty much bulletproof. Everything that I've ever had to do to this mower over the years was, quite frankly, either needed to be done because of neglect and maybe some just regular wear and tear maintenance issues, but for the most part it was neglect. You can see the top of this thing is kind of rusted. This has spent many a year uncovered outside or in an unheated garage at best. One of the reasons why this is such a great mower is because this deck is cast aluminum. And what's great about a cast aluminum deck is, unlike your make trash daily type mowers or your made to die mowers that usually are stamped steel decks, this deck doesn't rot out. Now, it can corrode. Aluminum can corrode, but it just takes so much longer for it to get to the point where it's, damaged beyond use. So I'm the third owner of this mower, but I know the history of it because I inherited this mower from my mother, and she actually got this mower from my sister and brother-in-law. And when they were selling their house and moving away, she decided that she wanted this mower. So I don't remember exactly what the transaction was. I don't know if they just gave it to her or what. But I remember when my brother-in-law bought this mower, he bought this from a local Toro dealer. This did not come from a big box store. This was actually a dealer mower. And I remember at the time, this is probably going on 20 years ago, if not more. I remember at the time, he spent like $500, I think, on this mower, which I thought was absolutely nuts. But what do I know? Because fast forward, to now, and I would say this thing was worth every penny. This has a mulching feature and some other stuff. So for instance, it came with a bagger. It's a bagger mower, so you can use the bagger if you want. If you don't want to use a bagger, it comes with this chute. You just lift up the back here, and this goes on here, as opposed to having the bag here. Furthermore, if the grass isn't too tall, you can leave this off and shut, and what happens is this becomes like a recycler mower. It's a mulching mower. So it'll pick up the grass blades and just keep them suspended underneath there so that they can get chopped multiple times into a very fine mulch that then gets just redeposited on the lawn. So you don't have to bag at all if you regularly mow your lawn and it's not too tall. So that's a great feature. But the main thing about it is this thing's just been bulletproof. Right now, I'd say just recently, this had been sitting for 2 years and I hadn't been using it because I had the rider. And my 14-year-old son started to express an interest in cutting grass, so I decided to fix up a push mower. And the first one we looked at was, I had an old junk mower that was one of those brands that it was the made trash daily mower, and that was just too far gone, so we trashed that thing. So I dug out old dependable here, which hadn't been used in at least 2 years, maybe even as many as 4 or 5 years. And when it was put away, it was not put away properly with fuel stabilizer or anything, so there was a nightmare inside that carburetor. But I took it apart, I cleaned it, and there's corrosion inside the bowl. I cleaned that up, put it all back together, and the thing runs beautiful. So a testament to the construction of this motor, to say the least. The other thing was I had to replace the rope on the pull starter here because it had snapped, and that's actually a used rope that I stole off of the made trash daily mower just so I could fix this thing. And now it starts and runs like a dream. But what we noticed was that as we were cutting the grass, the blade was slowing down more and more, but the motor would never bog down. The motor was making plenty of RPMs and had the power, and something else was going on there. Well, this has a blade clutch mechanism in it that does two things. you have to hold the handle up at the top. You have to pull the handle all the way down till it clicks, and then pull it back up, and that will start to engage the blade. And if you let go, like if you fall down or if something happens, you trip, as soon as you let go, two things happen. First, the clutch immediately disengages. Second, a brake mechanism snaps on and stops the blade fairly quickly, and it's a very nice safety feature. So that's how that mechanism, I'll get to that in a minute. That's what's going on there. There's a problem with that mechanism, turns out, and I already took it all apart, so I apologize. You're not going to see disassembly, but you're going to see reassembly. So you just basically, when you're disassembling, it's reverse order. The only other issue with this mower right now, besides of course the corrosion, is this cable right here is broken, which actuates the speed control from neutral, first, second, or third speeds for the ground speed on the mower. But what we've been doing is we're just using this as a push mower, because I got a 14-year-old son and he's strong and he's got plenty of vigor. He can just mow the lawn with this thing the way it is. So here's an example of what's happening with the corrosion. Is it's causing the paint to fail, so the paint's just coming off. And this is where the data plate is that explains that this is a model 26622 and serial number 0007708. So I don't know, that serial number probably would tell you what year it was manufactured. Made by the Toro company of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Okay, so I don't know where Toros are made these days. Maybe they're still made there, but this is barely hanging on, so it's a good thing I'm documenting this model number, because not very much longer, I think, and that's going to go by the wayside. So let's get into this blade problem. All right, so we're going to have shaky cam. Sorry about that, but I can't get the tripod down low enough. So now we're looking at the underside of the mower, and this is the area right here where the blade clutch mechanism and everything is housed. There's a cover that I removed. So you got to take the blade off and a few other pieces, and then you can take this 4 bolts out, and this cover comes off. That exposes this area here. It's not unusual apparently for grass to get stuck in here over the years, so it's not a bad idea to take this apart and clean it, I guess, periodically. You know, probably, I mean, every so many years. It's not a common maintenance item. Anyways, the point being is that grass can get stuck in here, and then you can get a little bit of engine oil in here from time to time. What can happen is it'll turn the grass into this sticky, sludgy material. It can contaminate the belt, cause other problems. Because the design of this thing is pretty wild. All you've got is this hub right here, okay, which by design is really floating, but it's locked in by these bolts. Okay, so you can see it's freewheeling, and the blade is mounted to these 2 studs right here. Okay, so that doesn't move at all. This is actually the end of the crankshaft. So this is the end of the crankshaft, and normally when the motor's running, this would be spinning, and this is not allowed to spin because there's a brake shoe that goes on the side here, and I'll show that in a bit. And what ends up happening is you have a V-belt that rides around, not this area, this is where the brake shoe engages, up in this area right here. If I had this piece off, you would be able to see that it's actually a dome-shaped piece. So that actually creates a taper between this dome-shaped plate and this dome-shaped piece. There's a taper in there, and the belt sits in there. And then the belt goes over to just an idler pulley, a freewheeling idler, that's on a bracket that is able to be moved out of position when that cable is actuated. And what happens is, when the pulley is moved in that direction, it tightens on the belt, and it causes the belt to pull into the narrower throat of this assembly, and that's what actually makes it engage and start working. And then also, as it moves away, it disengages the brake shoe. So that's a pretty neat and simple design. So here are the basic components. Now these I already cleaned up pretty well. They were pretty dirty and grungy. This is the bracket it's a two-part assembly, and the reason why it's two pieces is because you see this is the brake shoe right here, and this is the brake material. You can see how thick it is to start, and then it wears, and eventually this will wear to the point where it may need to be replaced. Now, if you need to replace this, well, this little chunk of material right here is riveted onto this bracket. So what you got to do is you have to replace this part of the bracket. You don't have to replace this part, just this gold part, okay? The problem is, online I checked, it's like $40 something for this little bracket with this brake on here, which is just, that's unfortunate, because you can see that all it is a hunk of metal with this brake material on here. So if they had put regular fasteners in here and just made this available as a separate piece, it would be cheaper to repair, I would think. But maybe they got a good reason for having rivets here. Maybe they didn't want it to loosen up over time. I don't know. So there's that assembly there. I already cleaned this up, like I said, and I'm going to pull this apart, okay, clean all that out and put fresh grease in there, because this is basically just a bushing, and that's going to need some grease in there. Then we got this little dandy thing here. This is the idler pulley that I was talking about. It's got a 6201 bearing, really common bearing. I think they even commonly refer to these, playfully refer to these as skateboard bearings. Nothing really special about that bearing. It's a dirt cheap bearing. It's very easy to find. So if you wanted to replace this one, too bad, because look at what they did here. This is a two-piece sheave. Okay, the way this is constructed is they actually have a cup that the bearing sits in on both sides. So the way this is made is they have the half of the sheave, they put the bearing in, they put the other half of the sheave in, and then you can actually, I don't know if you can see these little marks here, they spot weld this. They have a machine that actually comes and goes bzz, bzz, and spot welds this thing, so it's an assembly. So now, if you wanted it, you can see mine's pretty crunchy here. I sanded this down a lot. You can see it's really rough shape. I would love to replace this, but you know what? It's over $30 for this assembly, which is a damn shame, because this little stupid skateboard bearing, if you buy these in bulk, you can get these for like 99 cents a piece from a cheap import. And yeah, this is a Taiwan bearing that's in here, nothing fancy about it. Luckily for me, this bearing is still good, so I'm just going to reuse this assembly as it is. But that's kind of nerve-wracking that they do something to make that way, so that you can't replace just the bearing when it goes bad. You got to replace this whole assembly, which makes this a special, you know, well, I think originally these were OEM. I think now there's actually aftermarket ones out there, because it's such a common probably failure on so many of these mowers over the years. Then there's the belt. All right, here's the belt. The original belt, this belt's never been replaced. This is a rib belt that was in there. There are no numbers on it whatsoever. But if you go online, there's plenty of places where you could find the original part number for this belt. And on later mowers, they went to a 22-inch belt. This is a 24. So you got to make sure you get exactly the right one. Once you get that OEM part number, the Toro number, you can then cross that online any number of ways you want. And you can go to, I went to my local Napa and it crossed to a 4L240W. So the only difference between this belt and this belt looks thinner, but that's because this belt's worn to heck. Okay, because don't forget, the way this works is the wear actually happens on the side of the belt here. And it doesn't have the teeth, but we don't care about that, because that's not really where it's grabbing. Most of the grabbing is happening on the side of the belt. So this should work perfectly fine. There are people online who say, well, you know, pay the extra and go for the OEM belt. But they also say it's only a few dollars more. Well, no, because if you want to buy this online from a V-belt supplier or some of the other places, I found this belt online for as little as $9. I got this with tax for under $14 at the Napa. And if you go to the Toro dealer, it's something like $28 or $36 for the belt. At least the local ones here in Massachusetts. So we're going to use this belt, and you can tell that it's a good fit in the sheave. Perfect. Okay, so it's the right size belt for the job. So now all I got to do, I'm going to clean this, put grease in it, and get ready to just start doing some reassembly. Step in reassembly, which, like I said, is the reverse order of disassembly, is I had to take this idler pulley out because the belt goes around it. So now that you get everything clean and grease free, hopefully. Okay, so I got a can't twist clamp and a 2x4 there, and I got it up on my outdoor workbench. This gives me an easy way to get to this and use both hands. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to find a clean rag. Actually, I'll just get a paper towel, and I'm going to use some acetone, and I'm going to clean off this surface of this as best as I can. If I wanted to be really thorough, I could get this nut off and take this, pull this piece off and get this off completely and clean it, but I don't want to go through that trouble. I'm gonna let that acetone evaporate. All right, now I'm going to reinstall this assembly, and hopefully I can remember exactly how this goes. But essentially, you got two components that link up to this. There's this rod right here with a spring on it. Okay, that's one of the components, and then there's a, where the heck is it? Well, there was. Well, he was playing with the handle on this thing while it was on the ground apart. I think the cable that I'm supposed to hook on is retracted up into nowhere. No man's land. Peter, yeah, go ahead and let go of this. Try pulling the handle all the way back down. Yeah. All right, pull it back up again. He pulled on it and it popped up somewhere. I don't know where it went. All right, back to work on the mower here. Gonna put this assembly back in. And I actually had to look online at the exploded parts diagram because I'd forgotten how this went. And I couldn't figure out why this wasn't gonna go the way it should, and it's because I got this bolted backwards. So the bolt, this bolt with the plain washer, goes up through this side here, and this special washer with the seal on it is on top of here, up against the mounting point, so that this bracket sticks up into here, and there's a U-shaped metal hook in the linkage that you just hook this onto, like so. Okay, but I'll get this bolt backed out, it'd be easier. Over here you've got this rod with a spring on it. So you got to move the spring back, and that sits in a hole over here on the other side of this thing, like this. All right, so I don't know if you could see that or not. It's kind of behind here, but there's a hole in this bracket that sits in. I think maybe the easier thing to do would be maybe get the rod and the spring in position first, because this does not want to move easily. Okay, now I got this stuck on here. Hold on. Okay, so let's try that again. Right here, this hole right here is where that end of the rod's going to go through. Oh, so this linkage must have to go over the top of the other belt that's in here for the yeah, it must have to go over the top of the other belt that's in here for the self-propelled drive. All right, there we go, like this. All right, so that linkage goes over and faces that way. Now we're cooking. Then if you tilt this up like this, hold it vertical, you can stick it over the end of the hook. Once it's hooked on, you can rotate it down. Now push the spring back onto the rod, compress it, get the rod in that hole, pull the whole thing back against the spring and get this bolt in. But oh, before I do that, Make sure your belt's in position. I should have done that before alright, hold on. Obviously I should have done that before I moved this whole thing back. So, get the belt over. Okay, now this is still in position and the linkage is still connected, so now I should be able to get this bolt through. Now the trick is you got to pull against the tension of this thing and get the brake shoe onto the drum.
That is great. Good design. Either with the airport or lost it. My kid puts the roll.
I'll let you come on.
I know I didn't make a before video, but trust me, this thing's fixed. Yeah, I know. Lawn's overdue, but it's not really a lawn. This area here we don't normally mow. I usually wait until, well, somewhere around this time I usually break out the brush hog on the back of the tractor and I just make a few passes through that area. So the only thing left to do on this mower, if I wanted to restore it to all its former glory, would be to fix the self-propelled part of it, which the belt under there is not so great, and that would have been a good time to replace it if everything else was fine. But the main problem with the self-propelled mechanism is this cable broke, and unfortunately this cable assembly is exactly that. It's an assembly. This completely just pops out of here, but it's a sealed unit. So it's sonically welded or whatever at the factory. There are no screws. There's no way to take this apart and just replace the cable. It's an assembly, this and the cable. And quite honestly, I had this bent out like this because I think that I may have been grabbing this with pliers trying to move it. I think maybe the cable itself is just seized. So if I recall correctly, this was pretty expensive for that cable, and that's why I never bothered getting a new one.